If you hand over your whole paycheck the day it comes, every month, without a word, and you have done it so long you have forgotten it was ever yours to hand, this story is for you. Ruth Ann Prewitt cleaned a bank building all night for 11 years and never once had a dollar of her own in it, until at 57 she started keeping back a single envelope, and that one envelope changed a life she thought was already decided. It didn't start with a plan. It started with a bank vault she mopped past every night at 2 in the morning, a great steel door thick as a mattress, standing open on shelves and drawers of other people's money, and Ruth Ann pushing a mop past it in her rubber-soled shoes, close enough to touch year after year, with nothing of hers on the other side of that door or any door. Ruth Ann worked the graveyard shift on the cleaning crew at the 3rd Coastal Bank building in downtown Savannah. 6 floors of offices that emptied out at 5, so that women like her could come in at 9 at night and make them shine by dawn. She emptied the little steel trash cans by the teller's windows, cans that all day had swallowed torn deposit slips and adding machine tape and gum wrappers off the wrists of people counting money that was going somewhere. She wiped the long marble counter where the deposit envelopes sat in their brass holder, blank ones, free for the taking, and she took none, because what would Ruth Ann Prewitt put in a deposit envelope? She was 57 years old, and she had been working since she was 16, and her whole grown life had run on the same simple arrangement, the arrangement that felt as natural as tide coming up the river. On the last Friday of the month, her check cleared, and she brought it home to the kitchen table on Veldberg Street, and she handed it to Leon. Leon was her husband of 34 years, and he was not a bad man, and that is the part that is hard to say plain. His back had gone out on him at the paper mill years back and never come right, and he sat most days now with his leg up and the television going, and he handled what he called the finances, which meant Ruth Ann's check went into his keeping, and out of it went the rent and the light and his medicine and her medicine, and a little to their son, who was always between things, and a little to Leon's brother, and a little here and a little there, and none of it, not $1 of it, had Ruth Ann's own name on where it landed. She never saw it again once it left her hand at that table. She had handed it over so many times that the handing had stopped feeling like giving something away. It just felt like Friday. Her nights had a shape she could have walked blind. The long fluorescent hum of empty floors, the smell of the pink soap in the big sinks and the wax on the tile, the way the city went quiet under her one window while she worked, and the river a black ribbon past the rooftops. She knew which elevator groaned and which drawer stuck and where the loan officer kept a photo of a girl in a graduation gown. Her knees told her about every one of those 11 years by the 4th floor, and her hands, when she got home at dawn and pulled off the rubber gloves, were pale and puckered as if she'd been in water all night. A good month, between her check and the little bit of ironing she still did for a lady on Habersham, was more money than passed through some hands with a diploma over the desk. But it went through Ruth Ann's hands, like the river through her fingers off the dock, cool and quick and gone, and there was never a drop of it left she could call her own. Nobody ever asked Ruth Ann what she made. Nobody asked what she kept. They only ever asked, gentle enough, whether the check had come. If you don't know this channel, it was built for the women who clean up after everybody and go home with nothing of their own. Women like Ruth Ann, women like you. Stay right here with us. There was one thing in that house that had always been only hers. On the shelf above the washing machine, behind the box of powder, was a little transistor radio no bigger than a bar of soap, the plastic gone yellow cream with age, a wheel on the side for the tuning. Ruth Ann bought that radio for herself at 16, with the first pay she ever earned shelling shrimp on the river, before Leon, before the sun, before there was a soul on this earth depending on her. She took it to work every single night. She kept it low on the cart while she cleaned those 6 floors alone in the dark, tuned to the gospel station that played straight through till morning, and that little voice singing in the empty bank was, some nights, the only company Ruth Ann had in all the world. It was the one thing she had never handed to anybody. The night the whole thing cracked open was an ordinary night near the end of a month. Ruth Ann was up on the 3rd floor emptying the cans, and she came to the one by the loan officer's desk, and somebody had thrown away a savings passbook, an old dead one, closed out, the account long empty. She stood there, holding it under the fluorescent light. Somebody had had a book like that. Somebody had walked into this bank, and a woman behind the counter had written their name in a book, and they had watched a number in it grow, and then it was over, and the book was trash, and Ruth Ann was carrying it to the dumpster at 4 in the morning. And she thought a thought that frightened her, because thoughts like that did not do a woman like Ruth Ann any good. She thought, I have cleaned this bank 11 years, and I have never had my name in a single book in it. I've emptied 1,000 of these cans, and never once put anything in. And she had her whole life still going, and it had already been spent, every dollar of it, by everybody but her. And she was 57, and her name was in no book anywhere in this world that said she had been here and kept anything. She had believed her whole life that this was what love looked like, that handing over the whole check with both hands was what held a family together, was what a good wife did, and that a woman who kept a piece back was a woman with 1 foot already out the door. She had believed it for 57 years. And maybe that was exactly why she had never once tried to keep a thing, because to keep it, she would have had to believe the family would hold together anyway, and she had never in her life been sure it would. She dropped the dead passbook in the dumpster and finished her floors and rode the bus home in the grey light with the radio quiet in her bag. It was a few nights later that Miss Bernice let it loose without meaning to. Miss Bernice Riley was 72 and had been on that night crew 30 years and had no intention of stopping. A big, slow, careful woman who moved through those dark floors like she owned them, which in every way that mattered she did. She and Ruth Ann took their break together at midnight on the loading dock, coffee from a thermos, the river smell coming up from the dark. And Miss Bernice talked the way she always did, easy and rolling, about her grandbabies and her bad knee and a woman from her church who had passed. And she said, holding her coffee in both hands, looking out at the dark water and not at Ruth Ann at all, you know what my grandmother told me, and it took me 40 years to mind her. She said, child, when they pass you the basket, you go on and give, but keep back 1 loaf for the road. Ain't nobody ever made it home on an empty basket. She said it like she was talking about the weather off the water. She wasn't teaching a thing. She sipped her coffee and asked did Ruth Ann want the last of it, and went on to the grandbabies. But Ruth Ann had gone still on that dock. She said, which is what you say. And the old woman's words had settled down onto her chest and would not lift 1 loaf for the road. And she carried them back up into the building and through the rest of the night, and they would not leave her be. When she got home in the morning, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed with Leon snoring beside her and the light coming yellow through the curtain, and she got up and went and stood in the little utility room by the washing machine. She took the transistor radio down off the shelf and held it in her 2 hands. She didn't turn it on. She just held it, the small, warm weight of the one thing that had always been hers, and she ran her thumb along the tuning wheel, and outside a mockingbird was running through every song it knew. And Ruth Ann stood there in her housecoat holding a radio, and could not have told a living soul what she was doing, or why her eyes had gone hot. She put it back behind the powder box. She went and lay down and did not sleep. She got up that evening and did what she always did. Fixed Leon's supper and set it by his chair, caught the bus downtown, tied on her smock, took the radio out and set it low on the cart, and cleaned 6 floors in the dark to the sound of somebody singing about a bright morning. She emptied the cans. She wiped the long marble counter with the brass holder of blank deposit envelopes, and her hand stopped over those envelopes. She didn't decide anything. She would swear to that after. Her hand just reached out on its own and took one, a single blank deposit envelope off the top of the stack, and folded it once and put it down in the deep pocket of her smock. And she stood there, with her heart going like she'd stolen the whole vault over an envelope they gave away for free. And she finished her floors, not knowing what on earth she had taken it for. She found out the last Friday. Her check came, and she cashed it herself for once before she got home, at the currency window at the grocery. And she stood at the little counter, and she counted off $250, and she folded it into that blank bank envelope, and she pushed it down into the toe of an old church shoe in the back of her closet. And only then did she carry the rest home and put it in Leon's hand at the kitchen table like always. And Leon counted it and never knew it was light, because he had never once known what the whole of it was in the first place. $250. One envelope. Less than went out of that house on Leon's brother in a month without a word said. And her hands shook doing it, and the shame rose up in her heart, the shame of keeping back part of what she'd always given whole, the shame of a woman sneaking her own money into her own shoe. It didn't take clean the first time. The very next month, the son called with a real trouble, a car towed and a job on the line, and Ruth Ann went to the closet and took the envelope out of the toe of the shoe before she'd hardly gotten it hid, and she gave it. And she told herself she'd start again when the water was calm, the way the water was always fixing to be calm, and never was. But that Sunday, in church, when the collection basket came down her pew, she watched her own hand lay a folded bill in it, without a flinch, glad to give, and something turned over in her cold and then warm. She could fill that basket. She could hand Leon the whole check. She could give her son the shoe money before it was warm. The one soul on all God's green earth that Ruth Ann could not bring herself to keep back one loaf for was Ruth Ann. She had spent 57 years passing the basket with both hands, and had never once kept a loaf for her own road. That was the month the one envelope finally held. $250 cash, folded into a blank bank envelope, into the toe of the shoe, before the rest ever reached the table. Some months it was hard, and the old voice sat down beside her, a good wife hands it all over, and twice she near about carried the envelope back out to Leon's keeping, where it would melt like salt in the river. Both times she took the little radio down off the shelf and held it a while first, and then she pushed the envelope deeper into the shoe instead. There is a keeping that nobody claps for. It is a woman on the last Friday of the month, folding one envelope shut before she hands the rest away, deciding in the quiet that her own road is worth one loaf too. No ceremony, no permission, just one envelope she keeps first, held month on month where no one can see, and that woman is finding her own way home a quarter-mile at a time. By the 8th envelope, there were $2,000 in the toe of that shoe, more money than had ever in her life been Ruth Ann's alone. And she counted it late one morning with the house asleep, sitting on the closet floor with the church shoe in her lap, and she felt a thing she had no name for, the terror and the joy of it all mixed. A woman standing in a doorway she'd been scared of for 57 years, and seeing it open onto her own front yard. The change in Ruth Ann was not loud, because the whole point was that it not be. But it showed. It showed the night her son called the shift, with that towed car sound in his voice, and Ruth Ann stood at the loading dock in the dark and said, gentle and clear, that she loved him, but she couldn't this time. And then she did the thing she had never in 57 years done. She let the silence after it be, she didn't fill it up with sorry, and her boy fussed and hung up, and the sky did not fall, and Ruth Ann went back up to her floors with her hands steady, and it felt like stepping off the bottom stair in the dark, and finding the floor right there where it had always been. By the year's end, there were near $3,000 folded in that shoe, and Ruth Ann had walked into the very bank she cleaned, in the daylight, in her good coat, and sat down at the loan officer's desk she had emptied the trash beside 1,000 times, and opened an account, and watched a woman write Ruth Ann Prewitt in a book. She kept that book in the toe of the shoe, with the last envelope. It was the first time her name had ever been in a book in that bank, and she had put it there herself. And there was a new girl on the crew, Shanice, 24, a baby at home, and a man who handled the money and handled it poorly. Ruth Ann watched her hand her whole check to somebody over the phone on the last Friday and go quiet, that flat quiet. And Ruth Ann knew that quiet the way she knew the gospel songs, from the first note. It was her own quiet, 30 years of it, a woman standing in the doorway of her own life, passing the whole basket, keeping no loaf at all. One slow night on the loading dock, Ruth Ann told her, not all of it, just the blank envelope, and the toe of the shoe, and one loaf for the road. And she watched the girl's face do the thing her own face had done on that dock, the thing that happens when somebody tells you out loud that your own road counts too. Shanice said she couldn't keep 250. There wasn't 250 to keep, there was barely enough as it was, and Ruth Ann said the truest thing she knew, and it came out shaped like Miss Bernice, though she never planned it. She said it doesn't have to be 250. Keep back one loaf, whatever your loaf is, $10 too. Keep it back first, before you pass the basket, because the empty basket is a lie, baby. They will always find one more thing for the last of it. The only loaf that ever really gets you home is the one you keep before you give the rest away. And she reached into the pocket of her smock and took out a blank deposit envelope, one of the free ones off the marble counter. And she pressed it into the girl's hand and told her to start with that. The girl held it like it was money already. And that night Ruth Ann cleaned her 6 floors in the dark, and she pushed her mop past the great open vault the way she had 10,000 times, all that money behind the steel. And for the first time in 11 years, it did not make her feel like nobody. Her name was in a book in this building now. On the cart, low, the little radio she'd carried since she was 16 sang about a bright morning coming, and Ruth Ann, in the dark, alone, hummed along, keeping back for herself the one thing that had always been hers, and the one thing that was hers now, besides. Before you go, do one thing for me. In the comments, write, I kept one loaf, just that. I want to read every single one, because there is a woman scrolling by right now, handing over her whole basket. And she needs to see that other women started keeping a loaf back. And if this story found you tonight, stay with us. Tap subscribe and turn on that bell so the next one comes straight to you, because there's a new story here every week, and one of them is yours. If you want to take the first step today, there's a free app that will help you bring a little order to all of it. Gentle and simple. The link is down in the comments, and listen to me. When they pass you the basket, and they will, you go on and give what's yours to give. But keep back one loaf for the road. You will never make it home on an empty basket, and home is where you are going. I'll see you next week. Next.